And we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when or where you're watching this show. This is the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live Show. I'm Marion Spears Carr, and I'm your host. And I'm so excited to be here with my friend and colleague for another discussion around business model innovation, Mr. Todd Dunn. Todd Dunn is an innovator, a board member. Modern Healthcare named him one of the top innovators in healthcare in 2023. And Todd's become my friend. Today we're talking about business model innovation, how it is the driver of organizational transformation. Todd, say hello to the audience, introduce yourself. And if you're watching live, let's hear it in the comments. Let us know you're watching, post in the comments. And when you have questions for Todd, let's just jump into it. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And for those of you who don't know, Todd's actually in North Carolina, where I'm from, and I live in Georgia, where he's from. So it's a little confusing. But anyway, Todd, you and I have talked a lot over this last couple of years, particularly around why healthcare transformation is going to be driven and has to be driven from the business model perspective. And I'd love for you just to kind of give us a primer on that. We talked about it in our previous show, but I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about that. And let's talk about that problem that you think is going to be solved through this, or some of the examples. Again, if you're watching live, please let us know. You're in the comments. And Todd, what are your thoughts?
I've shared this a few times, Marion, so if I'm repeating myself, it's pretty intentional. When I first started at my role at Atrium, I interviewed 70 some odd people, and I asked them two fundamental questions. If I asked 100 people to write down their definition of business model, how many different definitions would I get? Not one person told me less than 100. One person told me 102. And then I asked the question, how many of those 100 business or administrative leaders have said or heard the term business model in a meeting in the last month? Same answer, every single one of them. And inherently, when we look at that, especially in medicine, in a structure where we try to remove all unnecessary variability, but yet we're driving for leaders to understand business models, I think that we have the opportunity to think about this in a different way. Mm-hmm. Alex Osterwalder, the guy that created the business model canvas along with Yves Pigneur and others, said that a business model is the way that a company is organized to create, deliver, and capture value. And he built a canvas. And so when I talk about the need for organizations to start thinking in terms of a system around business models, mm-hmm. I think in terms of much like we do in medicine, terms, tools, processes. And I just think that's the next layer. It is the transformation element. The element of competition and analysis should be the business model, not just the process.
Yeah, you and I talked about this in the pre-show. You and I were talking about this idea of Chris Argyris' work around single loop and double loop learning, and how single loop learning is this idea we pick a problem that we're trying to solve, we create a process, which is Lean Six Sigma and all the different measurement tools that we have, and then we measure that, and then if it's not the right process, then we have to we tend on the single loop model, we go back and just try to fix the process. But you and I talked about how double loop learning is really around, are we solving the right problem? And you had a great example of that. And let me give a shout out first. Matt Shearer checking in from Lubbock, Texas. Good to see you on the show, Matt. Talib, thanks for checking in from Jacksonville. And again, we want to know who's watching. We'd love to have you as part of the interactive discussion. So please let us know you're there. And if you have questions for Todd. So talk about that part of business innovation in relation to solving the right problem.
One of my favorite examples is from a good friend and leader that I admire a lot at Intermountain Healthcare. His name is Dan Lillienquist. And Dan was on his treadmill one day thinking about the business model of generic drugs in the country and how you really have an inelastic demand. If you need the drug, you've got to have the drug. And what some of the bad actors were doing was cutting back supply to raise the cost. Their margins would go up. I mean, we all heard the 4,000% margins on some of this.
Yeah.
And if I think about your example of this double loop learning, an approach Dan could have taken was to try to get the regulators, the government, to put more pressure on them. Or they could have tried to redo the contracts, the process of contracting, the logistics processes, et cetera. But what he did is he rethought the business model of it. And because right at the heart of it is just a generic drug. That's not going to change. The value of the drug clinically is not going to change. So how do you change all the other value? And here's what he thought about is there was an antagonist in the model, and the antagonist was the behavior of the bad actors. And how do you get rid of that?
Mm-hmm.
And so he thought, well, since it's a generic drug, could not just take the patent and get a contract manufacturer to build the drug? Like, yes, we could do that. But if we did that, what would have to be true? Well, you need demand. Well, there's already demand from hospitals. And so what he did was he'd organized Civica RX with some philanthropists and others. They put the money in, and then they went to all these hospitals, and the hospitals committed half of their volume of that generic drug back to Civica RX. So day one, you have demand, which means what you don't have. You don't have to have a big sales and marketing team. So he changed the business model. He didn't change the process necessarily, but they changed the business model. And that is one of the most disruptive ones I've ever seen, because now we've seen some of these bad actors start to behave better. And that's great. That was the whole intent of it anyway, is to kill the Horcruxes really in the business model of generic drugs. And the reason that I bring that up is that if you zoom out and you look at the business model and what are the elements you could change your key partners. You could have a resource of your own contract manufacturing facility like they do in Virginia now for insulin. Yep. You could take out the third party or the middleman, that raises the margins. There's just so many things you can do when you think about a business model, whether it's dialysis, whether you think about the kidney as a business model. It's far more impactful than just thinking about changing or improving the process.
Yeah, I love that idea. And some people are checking in. Robin is checking in from Atlanta. Thanks for being here. Tim checking in from Denver. Talib also said, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. He's deeply passionate about this topic. So Talib, you want to connect with Todd after the show and learn more about that. And Amanda Gibson's checking in. What would have to be true? One of my favorite questions. Hello, she's checking in from Boise. She's one of my fellow lecturers, and glad to have her. And Tim's checking in. So when from my audience, and by the way, if this is the first time you've watched my show, it's usually on Fridays, but we're changing it up. We're going to mix it up a little bit so more people can have access. This is called the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live Show. And Todd, I don't know if this is official or not, but I'm going to make it official because I believe it's true. I think this is my 100th episode, so I think you're number 100, and awesome. I'm so glad it's you. I'm so glad it's you. Okay. So glad to have you. So if you're watching this, I interview people that I'm also passionate about and the work that they're doing. Todd, one of the things that you and I've talked about is how, back to the part you were talking about how we've always focused on process. Mm-hmm. To talk a little bit about, give us an example of how business innovation is really making the point of care better for the patient, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We want to be innovative. We want to increase revenue so we can continue to provide those kind of services that are necessary competitively at a right cost. But you were giving me an example of something you're involved with around being able to do blood draws without needles. So how is business innovation as a core value going to improve the patient experience?
So I'll talk about that one quickly. So today, when you go in a hospital and they run a peripheral IV in your arm, after about 30 minutes, that catheter that's in the vein will get soft like a noodle. It needs to, so that it doesn't damage the inside of your vein, right? fundamentally the job, if you will, the functional job of a needle is just to get blood out of the body. So why do you need the needle? Is kind of a fundamental question. And let me see if I can find one of my devices. Yeah, I'll find it. I got it.
Yep.
But for the longest time, people have looked at blood draw as a process. I look at blood draws as a business model. And let me explain the difference. For the longest time, we've made sharper needles, better, different securement things for the catheter. But there's a company that I'm on the board of, full disclosure, I'm on the board of, named Avia Vascular. And what they figured out how to do is they've built this. It's a device. You repurpose the catheter, you screw this in there, and then that little lumen goes up through the catheter, draws blood without a needle, etc. And you say, how's that a business model? Well, if you step back and you think about there's a value proposition to someone, and we mainly just think about drawing blood, but think about a phlebotomist. Phlebotomy turnover is offensive, how high it is in this country.
It's unbelievably high, yeah.
Unbelievable. It's over 100% at some hospitals every year. And it's because they're inflicting pain on you and they don't want to. Well, that's a cost to a system to have to replace those people. Same with nursing. Needle stick injury rates because of a needle, rotten. The violence escalation against nurses or phlebotomists, 4 or 5 in the morning, is higher than it should be. The patient trauma, like I mentioned, needle stick injury rates, all the antibiotics.
Yeah.
So if you zoom out and you look at the business model of it, now all of a sudden you start understanding comprehensively the cost and the business of getting blood out of a vein. And when you look at it comprehensively, then you can make a much more informed decision of whether or not you want to change the device that you're using to get blood out of the body or not. That's why I talk about that, Marion, is because the business model has 3 sections, really. Desirability, it's all about the consumer, the people. Feasibility, which someone could argue is the operating model. And viability is the cost model. Well, historically, we've just looked at the needle, the syringe, a vacutainer, maybe the tube, and a little bit of time. When you look at redraw rates, hemolysis, needle stick injury, violence, phlebotomy turnover, now you start seeing blood draws, getting blood out of the body as a business model. And it really drives you to think about it differently and to make much more informed economic decisions because it's a comprehensive view versus, to your point, single loop, just a process view. We're going to zoom out. We're going to keep the process there, but we're going to look at the entire business model of it. That's just one example.
Yeah, I love that. I love that example that you shared, and that's why I wanted you to bring it up. So tell me a little bit about leadership right now in healthcare. Where can they begin to make that shift in thought? Where's the place for them to start? Because and for those of you who don't know, my background, I run a newly founded company. I just founded my 3rd company in December. We're an executive search leadership solutions firm. Yep. I've been working in that world for 30 plus years. And I work with healthcare leaders all over the country. But where's a good place to start to begin that shift from this is what we've always done it, this is how we've always looked at it, to now we're going to look at it from a point of business innovation?
That's a great question. I think about.
I didn't prep you for that one. Sorry, just throwing that in there.
No, it's delightful. I'm glad you asked it. I think a lot of Act 1 of innovation has been focused on the shiny, the latest thing coming out of Silicon Valley, and calling that innovative or announcing a partnership. And we know what happens in most partnerships. I mean, look at Starbucks and Kraft. I mean, there's so many things. Even look at Theranos. Everybody got so excited about Theranos as the process of analyzing blood. Buckminster Fuller has this quote, and he said, if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Give them a tool which requires that they think and behave in a new way.
Love that quote.
I think leaders need to shift from thinking about innovation as an outcome and think about innovation as a verb. Like, what do I do? And I'll get to this in just a minute. The outcome would be transformation, but then what would transformation look like? And to connect these two, I think you have to have a system of transformation. And within that, just like Buckminster said, you have to have tools. I believe in using canvases. I love the work and the structure that Rita McGrath has for discovery-driven planning and for seeing around corners. But just like medicine uses protocols, just take a sepsis protocol. It's documented, you adhere to it, it's taught, it's a language, it's a method. I think we need to do the same for transformation. We literally need to build a transformation playbook. And then you're innovating around processes, you're innovating around business models, you're innovating around everything that entails. But if you don't teach it, if you don't standardize around what a business model looks like, what does real consumer value look like, you're operating in the world that's just the world of assumptions. You're, as Clay Christensen would say, you're competing against luck. And heaven knows that healthcare, I don't care which part of healthcare you're in, doesn't have enough money or time to compete against luck, but it seems like we do it all the time. And put a system in place. And I think leaders need to move from thinking they need to have the answers to asking questions. So for instance, Amanda wrote, what has to hold true? Yeah. Well, what do you believe a consumer is going to do in response to what? And how do you know? What do you believe a partner is going to do? And in response to what? How do you know? I believe, just like in medicine, we diagnose before we prescribe. I think you have to have a system to do the same for business. Not that hard. It's just a change in leadership.
And you have to give permission to people to speak up. Like, they have to be able to say, they have to be able to ask those questions and say, well, why are we doing it this way? What is the reason? How do we get to this point? And I think a lot of organizations that I've seen, Todd, and you've been in them, you know it. You've been in the fray.
Yeah.
Some organizations don't have a culture where people can ask a question that might challenge the status quo. I think that's a key thing for leaders, is to give people permission to really ask those questions. What are your thoughts?
I think a leader who doesn't want to field questions isn't a leader. They hold a position. They're not a leader. In my opinion, a leader collaborates and remains curious, and the embodiment of curiosity is a question. So you want people asking questions all the time, and you want to ask questions all the time. So if we go back to Amanda's question, what has to hold true? Someone may say, well, it has to draw blood that's not homolyzed. Then your next question is what is our learning plan? What is our minimal learning experiment that we can run to learn fast and learn cheap, to de-risk any bigger decision down the road? And Steve Blank, really the father of the lean startup movement, back in 2013, when he was starting the I-Corps, there were 4 things that a team had to present. Here's what we thought, here's what we did, here's what we learned, here's what we're going to do next. And so you could almost, as a leader, say, what did you think? What did you do? What did you learn? What do you think we should do next to de-risk any major decisions? But then if you go back, Marion, to the template, show me your initial business model and the assumptions you had about the desirability, feasibility, and viability of your model. Show me the assumption burst that you ran. Show me the prioritized assumptions, and show me your learning plan for those that's going to de-risk any financial capital decisions or cost decisions that we will make. I think a leader does that, because that's engaging, it's changing. And by the way, if you put a system in place, it makes it safe for people to speak up. It negates a bad leader.
I love it. And some people are checking in, and Swati checking in from Houston Medical Center. Welcome, Swati. Paul Barkley, who's a hospital executive here in Georgia, is checking in. And Akshay is checking in from Houston actually is going to be on my show this Friday. He is an ambulatory surgery center consultant and leader. We're going to be talking about the problems that he solves and sees in the whole space of the ASC world.
Oh, yeah.
And talk about an area that is really changing from a business innovation perspective. That's crazy. Like what you can, like now you can do, there's surgeries being done in ambulatory surgery centers that even 5 years ago you couldn't fathom could be done there. Talking about business innovation.
Marion, the business model is different. It's so different. If we mapped it out on a canvas where we could visually see, I really believe in visual learning. Like, and I'll send you after the call, like we mapped out Civica, we've mapped out dialysis. You start asking the question from a different perspective. And another thing I would say also is this notion of learning and how we learn. What your learning plan, your learning plan shouldn't be that we're going to bring people to our conference room and have conference calls. It's something I call the 3 C's of design disease: conference rooms, conference calls, and cubes.
Yeah.
You got to go see. You really need to go ground, spend a day, spend a week, spend a month learning from where the action actually happens. And then you can understand the details of any decision of change that you would make on people's think flow and on their workflow. So I encourage us also to learn differently, learn through a lot of questions, learn through the scientific method. But, the eyes are the windows to the brain and the soul. And I think we need to spend far more time empathetically understanding the circumstances that people find themselves in so that we can design better models. The friction in the circumstance is one of the best areas to harvest things that need to be innovated around today and within the next year, versus thinking someone's going to like some new fancy widget out of Facebook or Apple, or maybe they will. Maybe that's a good thing. But I think about the world a little bit differently than that.
Yeah. So Paul is echoing. He said, absolutely agree. If you can go to the Gemba where the work happens.
Yeah. So
did I pronounce that correct? Gemba?
Yeah,
what is that? I don't know what that is.
Okay. It's Gemba.
Gemba.
And in the Japanese language, Gemba means the real place.
Okay. I didn't know that. I learned something. Thanks, Paul. Go ahead.
And I like where Paul's going with this, because in Six Sigma, those disciplines we teach go into the Gemba. And that's the right way to think about it. Mm-hmm. An edit on it is sometimes we go to the Gemba, we just look at the process.
Yeah.
But if we step back and not look at the process, but if we look at the progress people are trying to make on functional, social, and emotional dimensions, we expand our understanding of Gemba and the people in the Gemba and the processes that they interact with. But Paul is exactly right. There's nothing more powerful than watching something happen. I just wrote an article about spending a day in the emergency department in Charlotte. Man, you go to school in 12 hours and you realize a lot of what you believed that people struggle with or what they will do is completely wrong. And that's a really quick way to learn what not to do.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And unfortunately, because I've been a patient in an ER multiple times over my obsession with gravity sports, I can attest to what not to do. Not from my perspective, probably there's some things I shouldn't do. I wouldn't be in the ER. But I'll tell you, I've had some pretty crazy experiences where, it was an experience that I shouldn't have had leadership been involved, et cetera. And so, Paul, thank you for that comment. For those of you who are watching our show, this is the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live show that I started a while ago. And I mentioned earlier that I believe this is our 100th episode. Todd, I'm so glad you're my 100th episode. You've been on the show before. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've learned through this process, talking about experiential learning, is I've learned to ask better questions. Mm-hmm. And back to the point that we talked about is like, and I've always been a person who asks a lot of questions in my work, I have to ask a lot of questions about what they need, what
Yeah.
what's the culture, et cetera.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that again, in terms of the context of an example of leaders that you've worked with. You mentioned the gentleman that you've been so influenced by at Intermountain when you were there.
Yeah.
Talk about how they act on the responses they get, and from a business perspective. That's a real, because I think it's one thing to give people permission, which we talked about earlier, from a business perspective,
Mhm.
ask a question, but you have to have some action
Yeah.
to build on that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you brought a word up, then I'll hop into it about permission. And Rita McGrath, who a lot of us know as one of the Thinkers 50, just seeing around corners, discovery-driven growth, the end of competitive advantage. She wrote those books. She's just brilliant. She's working on a book called The Permissionless Organization.
Oh,
Can't
wow.
wait. Can't wait
Can't
for it
wait
to
to
come
read
out.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to my days at Cisco Systems. Two quick stories. John Chambers, who was the CEO at the time, came into our building and pulled about 8 of us in a circle, and we were all nodding like lemmings because at the time we're the most valuable company in the world. John was a rock star. And John looked at us and said, "Why are you all agreeing with me?"
Oh, wow.
And he said, "If there are 9 of us in the circle and 9 of us think the same way, only one of us is needed." And he said, "I'm not saying I'm going to fire you. What I'm doing is giving you permission to challenge my thinking. Please ask questions." And that was early in my days at Cisco. And so there was something happening with our project. There was an eHub project that you can look it up. And I got pretty frustrated with it. And I sent Randy Pond a really terse note. Now, remember, this is right out of grad school for me. And I'm just a dude. And I'm in no leadership position. And I said, it was terse, Marion.
I hear you.
Because John told us to speak up. Even if you don't say it right, speak up. We don't have time and money. By the way, we had more cash than we had revenue, and we had no debt. So,
Wow.
but we still didn't have money, is what he said. So Randy called me into his office. He called my phone. He said, "Hey, come see me right now." I thought, "Oh, I'm screwed."
I'm
I
in
walked
trouble.
in his office, and he did one of these things. He said, "Draw that on the board for me. Write out your
Oh, wow.
reasoning. Write your reasoning out for me." We spent the next hour with him probing with questions and him forcing me to give him what I thought. And as it was over, he said, "Okay, I support where you're going. I like it. Now let me coach you a little bit." He said, "Next time you're this passionate about something, maybe just set a meeting with me." He said, "But I also wouldn't want you to not send the email." Randy made it safe. We would debate like crazy. It didn't matter who was around the table. The leader set a culture of debate and progress as a unit. Fast forward a number of years, I was in a dialogue where a leader told me, "Stop asking questions. You're pushing back." And I said, No, I'm pushing for clarity."
Yeah.
And they said, "Nope, just agree with my vision and stop asking questions." When you contrast those two, you think, how successful would an organization be if all of us were like Randy? And I think
Yeah.
Simon Sinek would appreciate Randy, and so would Amy from a psychological safety perspective.
I would agree.
That's
I
a
would
great
agree.
example to me. He
Yeah.
thanked me for being so passionate about
Yeah.
seeing something I didn't like, and he encouraged me to fuel it. And so, you know what? It shaped my career. I just believe in speaking up, even if sometimes it's not the best for me. I think it's the best for the organization and the people we serve.
Well, one of the things I love about that, there's a lot of things I love about that example. And again, this is of an area of keen interest to me, is the organizational behavior, leadership behavior, et cetera.
Yeah.
Is the sequence in which that conversation went. Like if he would have brought you in and went right to the coaching part around, don't be so terse, don't be so aggressive, you would have shut down for the rest of that meeting. You would have felt gone. Yeah, you've been like, "Oh man, there's no way I'm writing on the board. There's no way I'm going to draw." I love the fact that he took the time to, that was an important learning moment, but he wanted to make sure that what you were trying, your message was heard and received first. And I think from an innovation perspective, from a leadership innovation perspective, I think that sequence is amazing. Yeah. We only have a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
We're wrapping up. And by the way, Jeffrey Bell's checking in. He's with the Texas Hospital Association. Jeffrey, thanks for good stuff. Thanks for providing Marion and Todd.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Getting to know Jeffrey a lot. We're really involved with the Texas Hospital Association and love the work that we're doing down there. But Todd, last parting shot. And if you want to connect with Todd, I'll put his LinkedIn connection in the chat, but also reach out to him. Amanda's also giving us a big thumbs up. Todd, in closing, what are your thoughts?
Document a system of transformation for your organization. I think strategy actually fits under the system of transformation. This is my personal take. Document it all the way down to the tools, the methods, the processes, the measures, and the behaviors that you expect as an organization. If you don't have a system of transformation, you're never going to stay ahead. You're going to keep fighting and grinding against what we have today. And just like Dan got sick of fighting and grinding against the generic drug business model, he changed the generic drug business, and now Cubans involved, et cetera. And so if you have a system, you can stay ahead, and you can also avoid making some pretty bad business investment decisions. If you have an evidence-based driven discovery system, you'll just be better off. Design it, document it, deploy it, change it over time, but it needs to be documented now versus relying on the shiny or the sharp person to, in quotes, be innovative.
What a great way to wrap it up. I put your LinkedIn connection in the chat, and glad to have everyone. Thank you, Robin, Jeffrey, Amanda, for your input and your engagement.
Yes.
Paul, everyone in the comments. For those of you who watch this in the replay, please also make comments. We will respond to them if you have questions for Todd. Todd, thanks for coming on the show. We'll do it again before the summer's out.
Thanks, buddy.
Got some other stuff we need to dig into on this innovative front.
Awesome.
I want to go deep on the whole idea around the hospital at home and the higher acuity care that's going to be delivered outside the walls, and the business models that are going to have to be created in order to make that a reality. Have a great day. Thank y'all for watching Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live show on this special day. Talib's checking in saying, thank you, Todd and Marion. Fantastic session. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
See you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.